hosting the 5th annual Creativity and Culture Conference, and I hope that you've found it to be inspirational as much as I have. Lots of insights, lots of really, really fascinating conversations. I think this year I interviewed around 40 people, and over the 5 years, I've interviewed at least 150 different people about their thoughts on creativity. And this year, the theme was about stories, the power of stories, the creative power of stories. And through the conversations, there were lots of different themes, and the ones that I found to be most pertinent were the fact that stories can enable us to learn and to feel inspired through the metaphors. Every story is subject to interpretation, and every story is a metaphorical allegory of our reality. In some cases, stories can serve like mirrors. We see ourselves reflected in these stories. We see someone else's story and we see our own lives reflected. And sometimes seeing our lives reflected in the life of another or a different story, we can find the words to articulate our own experience, whereas without that story, we may have experienced something but not known how to articulate our experiences. Stories can also serve as windows, as metaphorical windows. Through the stories of others, we see what we haven't experienced. We see what is beyond our horizons in terms of our life experience, and we may never personally experience those situations or those events, but we experience them through others, and that enriches our lives because our horizons are broadened. And another way that stories can serve as metaphorical allegories, through being catalysts for our emotions. You know, we've all heard stories that make us laugh, stories that make us cry, stories that make us angry, and stories that make us afraid. And I suppose that a lot of stories used to start wars start with these being a catalyst for these emotions of fear, where we feel that our own existence is being threatened, where we feel that our values are being threatened, our freedoms are being threatened. And so stories that evoke those kinds of very deep emotions can stimulate us to take action. And it's not always positive action. It depends on the emotions that have been stirred up through the story. So that was one thing that I found to be quite powerful through the conversations that I've had through this conference, is that stories have hidden meanings very often. They, on the surface, it may seem to be a very different story compared with when we look at the underlying agenda that the story is trying to perpetuate or to evoke. And I suppose it's looking at the deeper levels of the stories. What is the narrative that this story is being used to support? What is the underlying agenda? That becomes fascinating. It can become very liberating, in the sense that if we can learn to identify these hidden agendas, then we can avoid being manipulated through the stories, especially if they have a dark agenda. Stories can also serve to be bridges, and in my own experience, that this is what I've used stories for most, most of the time in my life, in my own family history. I've focused on stories that have been passed down through the generations, stories that my parents told me, stories that stories that I heard from my parents that were told to them through their grandparents, etc. So the stories are a way of defining who I am, the stories that make me identify with being a Sikh, for example, the stories that have been passed down through the generations over the last 500 years. They form an important part of who my culture, my identity, my values, my beliefs. So stories can serve to be like a compass for what we believe to be our most fundamental values, our expressed in those stories. So stories can serve to be guides, I suppose, guides, moral compasses in how we navigate through life. And another metaphor of stories is the fact that they can be like dreams. So stories as dreams, dreams in which we play, we experiment, we create new versions of our reality. Some people may think of them as being escapism. You know, if we feel oppressed, we can dream about our liberation. We can, through our imagination, everything is possible. And throughout the conference, I've heard a number of people talking about how with creativity, everything is possible. And those who are realists will argue, well, no, everything is not possible. That is not a fact. We have limitations. But in the world of imagination, everything is indeed possible. And that's an important aspect of stories, of how they can empower us. They can enable us to live our real lives and reflect on our real lives, and at the same time live these imagined lives, the better version of our current reality, which we can play with, we can experiment with to our heart's content. And at some point, those imaginations can also become part of our reality, should we wish to do so. So there's been lots of food for thought during this conference, as always, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you. We meet every Saturday at 10 o'clock and 7 o'clock. These are London times, through these mastermind events that I host on online. So if you would like to join us for those, please send me a message on LinkedIn or through other means. So thank you very much for your participation. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye for now.